Welcome back, guys. Today we have some creepy stories about people who actually died and then came back to life. Some of them are quite old stories and recorded in the history books, but some of them are very new, with doctors declaring people clinically dead only to have them be completely alive and breathing sometime later. Does that sound pretty creepy? Because it really is. Let's take a closer look, shall we? I'm Danny Burke, and this is the top 10 scary resurrection stories. And just before we get into that, don't forget to check out our brand new merch store. Look at the clothes, look at the gear. It's all new and it can all be yours now. Just follow the link in our description box. Mostamazingshop.com, that is mostamazingshop.com for all your most amazing merch. Coming at number 10 now, we have Tony Yardley. In 2015, a story emerged about a man from Ohio called Tony who came back to life 45 minutes after being declared dead. He was being prepared by nurses to be seen by his family when he began to show signs of life. He woke up 5 days later and made a full recovery. His cardiologist, Dr. Rajar Nazir, said that in the last 20 years of his profession he had never seen anybody who was pronounced as dead and then come back to life. In fact, he'd never even heard of it. Coming back to life is shocking enough, but for many people it was the sheer length of time with this case, 45 minutes, long past the point of potential resuscitation by many doctors' standards. Coming at the number 9 spot now, we have Kelvin Santos. Now this is an incredible story from 2012 about a 2-year-old Brazilian boy called Kelvin who is said to have come back to life during his own funeral only to die again. The toddler was declared dead after battling pneumonia and was handed back to his devastated family in a plastic bag. They held an open casket wake that night and held the funeral the next day. About an hour before it was due to take place, the boy apparently sat up in his coffin and said, "Daddy, can I have some water?" The family started to scream and freak out, and they thought they had just witnessed a miracle. But as quickly as he had risen, Kelvin then laid back down again and they were unable to resuscitate him. His father was convinced that his son was the victim of medical malpractice, and the police launched an investigation. Next up at number 8 now, we have Matthew Wall. He was a young farmer from England whose funeral was on October 2nd, 1571. The funeral bell rang out as he was being carried to the local church. Now he was a young man and his fiancée and family were inconsolable as they followed the funeral procession. As they made their way along the path, one of the pallbearers slipped on some damp autumn leaves and dropped the coffin. Now to their astonishment, they actually heard a knock from inside. They opened the coffin to find Matthew alive and well. He went on to marry his fiancée and live another 24 years. In his will, he left money for the church's path to be swept of leaves every single autumn. To this day, people still aren't sure exactly what caused this bizarre story to unfold. At the number 7 spot now, we have Li Zhufeng. In 2012, this 95-year-old Chinese woman was found lying dead in her home by one of her neighbors. She was not breathing. The neighbors placed her in a coffin which was left unsealed as part of Chinese tradition for family and friends to come and pay their respects to the dead. The next day was supposed to be the funeral, but the neighbors found an empty coffin. Li had woken up during the night, got up and started cooking. Yes, cooking a meal after she was declared dead. She seemed unfazed by the whole ordeal. In fact, if anything, she seemed a little bit annoyed because all of her possessions were burned as part of the local tradition there when a person dies. That's got to be up there with one of her worst days ever, surely. Alright, at number 6 now, we have the case of Fei Gilly. This 49-year-old woman was pronounced dead and woke up at her own funeral. She had suffered a heart attack and died, but then woke up in her own coffin to the sound of mourners at her funeral. The shock of waking up during her own funeral gave her another heart attack, and 12 minutes later, after being rushed to hospital, she was declared dead again. Essentially, her true death was caused by the shock of seeing that she had died, if that makes sense. It's just messed up. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Los Milagros. In Argentina, this baby girl made international headlines in 2012. She was pronounced dead after being born prematurely and was placed in a cold morgue refrigerator. 12 hours later, her mother asked hospital authorities if she could see her body. When they opened up the refrigerator, they heard the baby crying. She had been alive the whole time somehow, surviving in the cold cold for 12 hours. The whole thing baffled doctors and led Luz to be called Argentina's miracle baby. Sadly, she did eventually die from development problems 14 months later, but will be remembered for her incredible story. Okay, we have a pretty gruesome one now at number 4 with Carlos Cameo. In 2007, this Venezuelan man was declared dead after a car accident. He was taken to the morgue where examiners began to perform an autopsy, but as they began to cut into him, the cut started bleeding. That's not something that should really happen with a dead body. They quickly stitched up the incision, and soon after, Carlos woke up in unbearable pain. His grieving wife, who had arrived at the morgue to identify his body, instead found him in the hallway alive and well, except for, that cut. This story is quite scary because it makes it sound like enough pain can bring someone back from the dead. What a horrible thought. Alright, next up at number 3 now, we have Anne Green. In 1650, this English woman from Oxford was raped by her master's grandson and gave birth to a stillborn baby. She was accused of murdering the child and sentenced to death by hanging. She hung for over an hour and was pulled down by her friends because she wanted a quick death. She was declared dead and handed over to medical students for dissection, but just before they began, they found a faint pulse and heard weak breathing. Somehow, she had survived. After some medical care, the authorities deemed it an act of God and was seen as a sign of her innocence. She was free to go and went on to have 3 more children. I'm sure she wasn't quite as quick to forgive her rapists and murderers though. Alright, at the number 2 spot now, we have Elena Negrelli. She was pregnant and just 3 weeks from her due date when she had a seizure and collapsed. By the time paramedics got to her, they could not even find a pulse. They decided to deliver her baby via emergency C-section. The baby survived, but they told the father it had been a post-mortem delivery because Elena's heart was not beating at the time of the birth. But then, to their amazement, it started again. She was in intensive care after that for 2 weeks, but sure enough, she was allowed to return home with her baby girl and made a full recovery. Elena later joked that if her daughter ever stepped out of line in life, all they would have to do is remind her what they went through to bring her into this world. Kind of dark humor, but yeah, fair enough. And finally at number 1 now, we have Lyudmila Steblitskaya. In 2012, an incredible story emerged of a 61-year-old Russian woman who has come back from the dead not once, but twice. Yes, the first time her daughter had called the hospital to check on her only to be told she was dead. The daughter was devastated and began to prepare the whole funeral, but when she arrived at the hospital, doctors said her mother was alive and lying in a hospital bed. All she knew was that she had woken up in the morgue to find that her skin was peeling off from the cold. Then, a year later after this whole ordeal, she died again in a hospital, but this time doctors brought her back to life after several hours. Staff at the hospital were shocked and confused about how this could happen not only once but twice to the same woman. Well guys, that was all very interesting but disturbing. What do you guys think? Do you think all of these are real or just people declaring someone as dead when they really aren't? It's hard to figure out the truth, but fascinating to hear about nonetheless. Thanks for watching guys. My name is Danny Burke and I will see you all in the next video.